Welcome to the Sedona Soul Sisters show, down-to-earth discussions on metaphysics, spirituality, paranormal, and healing topics. The Sedona Soul Sisters are the most trusted psychic mediums in Sedona, Arizona. We are Rosalind Reynolds, myself, Ivory Lanou, Melissa Brace, and Terri-ann Russell. And we have offices in Sedona, Arizona, where we see clients from all over the world. Today's topic is ley lines. If you have questions or comments and you're joining us live, you can raise your hand or just write it into the chat room off to the right of your screen. And if you're watching and listening later, you can email us your questions. That email is in the show description. And I'm trying to figure out, making sure, it seems like we're not on the right mode where the person speaking is the one that's showing up on the screen. So I'm trying to fix that. It says it is, but it doesn't look like it is. Take it away, Roz. This is a subject I learned from you.
Well, I'm honored and flattered, but I actually, when I first came here, knew nothing about ley lines. So for me, it was just like an amazing source of curiosity. And I just kind of started reading about them and I just became fascinated. So, you know, we have on the earth, we have latitude and longitude. Everybody knows those. However, we also have a grid, and I always called this an energy grid when I was younger because I could feel it and I could feel that connectivity. I didn't know exactly what the ley lines did, but I could definitely, for example, I first came to Sedona in 1967 and I was 14 years old. And I was born the way I am, so I always had a lot of interesting sensations, feelings, visions, different things going on. And when I came to Sedona, I immediately said, I have lived here before, I'm going to live here again. And this is it. This is the place. And I was, you know, there, it was so undeveloped still relatively then. And I was in the car with my aunt and uncle and my parents. My aunt and uncle lived in Florence, Arizona, and we drove up to the Grand Canyon. So we came through Sedona, drove up through Oak Creek Canyon. I was absolutely, literally stunned and blown away as a kid, because not only did I know all of those things that I had lived here before, that I would live here again, that I could see myself in that previous life, and it was just fascinating. And I could feel the vortex energy here. And in fact, I've tried to remember if I had as much dizziness and crazy physical reactions as I do here. And I haven't really been able to remember that. But ley lines are so powerful and they're metaphysical. So they sort of transcend the physical. And they're so intense to people who are sensitive to them. And they go from one amazing place on the earth to another. It's like, it's a connective grid of all these amazing locations, like Machu Picchu in Peru. Everything that's, I actually consider Sedona to be its own vortex. I mean, there are intense locations of Bell Rock, Cathedral Rock, Boynton area, the canyon there, and the mesa, the entire mesa, not just the little point that we are shown as the vortex location up on Airport Mesa. That entire mesa is just an incredibly powerful energy field. So these, I mean, if you look at how many truly powerful locations. Stonehenge is another one that has been acknowledged. These are powerful, radiating, literally, energy. I think of them like beacons. They're like, we're called, we're called there. And for people who are sensitive to them, I mean, we can be out in the middle, and I know all you ladies do this as well as myself. We can be out in the middle of nowhere, not know that we're on a ley line, not know that we're even at an incredibly powerful point, and we know we can feel it. So it's interesting because it's very associated with new age, quote unquote. It's very associated with that. That's not what it is at all. It's a combination of geology, geography, physics. It's scientific. And this earth is an amazing, it's a sentient being. It's not just a rock that we're floating around on out in space. So I think of these ley lines as like the energy and the natural power of everything to do with Mother Earth. And, animals react to these lines, to these locations. They are highly sensitive to them. There's all kinds of stuff that goes on in the proximity of where these ley lines run. It's just fascinating. I always like science and geology and stuff. So for me, it was a fascinating adventure to start reading about it. And I actually did move here in 2004. So I had not studied anything about this area past I knew, how the energy was, the amazingly, gotta say it, weird things that would happen to me when I was here, because I kind of started coming here when I could. And I would just have all kinds of new and different adventures when I was here. I've always been able to hear, I've always heard voices. I've always heard, if I get in the right frequency, I hear different languages. I hear all kinds of, it's like I'm an antenna, I think, because I will be hearing these things, and nowhere is that more powerful than in Sedona. And I just feel like there are a lot of people who come here, they're so blown away by the beauty and how amazing it is to be here, that they never, contemplate this amazing grid that kind of all comes here. There's also a place in Siberia, very similar, where the ley lines kind of come in all around that area, but nothing like Sedona. So as a result of that, this is what creates the vortex swirls, the energy when these lines cross, when they go into an intense area of this natural energy. And the woman who first started talking about vortex energy was a psychic who lived here. And she just recently passed away. And I don't think she had lived here for quite a while. But I wrote down her name because I had never heard of her before when I read about her a couple of months ago. And her first name was Paige, as I recall. And she was so sensitive to these vortex areas too. And everyone, because of the power of the New Age movement, everyone assumes that all of this, the ley lines and all the metaphysical and natural information about how powerful this energy grid is, were created in the stories of the New Age, following, and the gurus and etc. Nothing could be further than the truth. This is a real, it's physics. It is a physics. So when you're experiencing this, when you think about, okay, our five senses are able to feel everything that goes on here in one format or another. Those of us who have a pretty pronounced sixth sense that works with those other five senses, this area is just amazing. And we laugh, all of us, who are, in our office, we'll come in one day and we'll all go, okay, you really having bad dizzy spells today. Really, the veil is really thin today. Now that's considered very much to be a new age religion issue. It's not. It is about this grid and how it bends and flexes energy. And it's really simple. It really is.
I started experiencing that when I lived in Cave Creek, and I didn't know that, but I found out later that like my house was right at the base of Black Mountain, which is actually a really powerful place. And I started having vertigo. But when I moved to that house that I lived in first in Sedona, that's when Roz, you really started talking to me about it, because I told you that it was like, I felt like I was in the Poltergeist movie where you put a line on the floor and you do experiments. There was a line in the middle of my kitchen, and if I crossed that line from one side to my sink, I was so dizzy I had to grab onto the cabinets or the counter to not fall over. And Roz finally came to the house. She's like, well, you're on a ley line here. And then up the street, one street up, directly up in a line, was my friend Janet. And she lived in a house right there. And I told her about it, and she's like, oh my God, I'm having vertigo. And her cats were like walking along, and there'd be a certain place they'd cross and they'd start wobbling a little bit. So her cats were definitely feeling it. And they really didn't like living on that ley line. Like her cats were weird, just not the same personality the whole time they lived there. And she was worried about them. So she moved to a different place, and now they're all fine. And the vertigo went away. And so, and I really don't have it in this house that I'm in now, but that was a real eye opener for the power of ley lines.
You can go online, and I have read, although I haven't done it, but I have read that you can go on Google Earth and you can actually see these PowerPoints all around the world on these different locations where the ley lines run. And we also, a lot of people are aware of the 33rd parallel, which is south of us here in Sedona. I think it's around the Casa Grande or Florence kind of area where it comes across. All kinds of amazing things occur on the 33rd parallel. And there are acknowledged sites on the earth where these ley lines actually cross, and the vortex swirl, which either, projects up or down, where people can describe how their vertigo, they either feel like they're going to be lifted or pushed. And it's really amazing. I remember I came here and before I moved here, I came here in 1999, I think. And I was with a friend of mine, and of course it wasn't developed like it is now. And there were a lot of areas where there were no houses. You could just drive through neighborhoods, and you could just walk up into the hills or do whatever. And I remember we drove to this place, and we both felt very attracted to it. And it was on right off of Bell Rock Drive. And it went up into this hill that was there. Weren't any houses right in that area. So we stopped the car and we decided we would walk up there. And before I could even get to that spot, I started hearing all kinds of stuff coming in, like all different languages, all kinds of, it sounded like listening to radio from all over the world, the universe, whatever. I mean, I don't know all those languages, but it was pretty mind blowing. And I remember I put my hands up like that. And when I put my hands up, because my hands are very sensitive to do psychometry and stuff. Oh my gosh, I was like, whoa, and practically fell over in the dirt because it was so intense. And that was before I knew anything about ley lines or any of the physics of it or anything. And I went home. I was living in Southern California then. And I went home and I was just like, I just had to think about that for about a month to kind of process that. It was really mind blowing to me. I'd never had anything like that happen before. I've heard a lot of noises, I've heard voices, I've heard all of that, but nothing to the level where I felt like I was on some connectivity that went everywhere. And I felt like it was in the universe, not just on the planet. I had to go home and mull on that for about a month.
Wrap your head around it.
Yeah, I was like, whoa.
Roz, didn't you tell me when I was going through all this stuff at that house in Sedona, didn't you tell me that being on a ley line makes it more likely you'll have paranormal activity at the location, that was like probably one of the reasons that house was so active?
Yes. There's something about that energy field that, I mean, and when I do work with haunted houses or people who are experiencing extreme paranormal activity on their land in their house, that's one of the first things I look for to determine and to see how it feels. And a lot of times I'll just have people give me their address wherever they are. And that's all I need. I mean, I can feel it. In the 80s, I used to have people fax me a picture of their land, of their house back in the old days, and I would just see it and I would know that, you've got a grid line. That's what I always call them. We've got a grid line, that's distant from your house. So let's put some crystals, down. Let's put some copper touching, trying to mitigate that, because people move into these locations just like you did. They have no idea. And the interesting thing is where you moved, not far from where you moved, you can drive down the road and you can feel that line out on the road that goes right into the subdivision where you were. So this stuff is very, to me, it's just very logical and very scientific.
It is, but people get ideas about things and forget that it has scientific basis. So I want to come back to this because you were saying, like, if you determine somebody's having problems at their house and you look to see if they have a ley line, isn't there really nothing you can do if a person's sensitive to ley lines? You can't move or remove a ley line. So do they really just need to move?
Well, this is important actually, because the energy of these lines can make people sick. If they sleep in a room where they're on a ley line, if they have, parts of their house, like I had a woman one time who kind of like the corner of her house, the ley line ran through the corner. And if she went over to sit in that corner, she would start getting a headache and not feeling well. These are really powerful energy grid lines. So the things you can do, the two things that I always found that worked were to put down inside or just on the outside of the house. Better on the inside if you can do that, because it just seems to radiate better through the interior. But a lot of people have pets. Like I had a client whose dog was always eating rocks, so she couldn't put anything down in her house. You have people that have cats that do whatever cats do. So Melissa has some interesting cats. And it's really important to create your own grid that interferes with the strength of that grid. So I would used to have people put down either a piece of amethyst or usually a piece of clear quartz, because that's easy for people to get a hold of. Go to wherever, buy some little solid brass fittings, put them touching, put them in the corners. And I used to have people do that inside their house or outside. But if they're outside, they usually have to be kind of covered so they don't get moved somehow. These things have a weird and mysterious way of getting moved at times. And if it was really intense on the property, like I just recently was working with someone in a different state who has a combination of energies that affect their health and a lot of paranormal sightings, different activities going on. So we actually discussed doing the quartz and copper. But the other interesting thing that I learned by accident, because somebody told me this when I was younger, and it does work. If you can find colored glass that's cobalt colored, or glass, really old glass that has been turned into that color by the sun, like it's been left outside. I don't know why, but it, and you put it along that ley line, it will break the connectivity somehow of that line. And I don't know why. I've tried to research that. I've tried to get some documentation for it, never have, but it works.
Well, that's good because there's a lot of people who cannot move.
I know.
So,
And when you innocently move into, just like you did, when you innocently move into a location and you have all kinds of ley line energy there, and you have all kinds of stuff in the proximity of that property that's giving off, the history of what went on there, and it's kind of playing in a time loop. Yeah, you're kind of in a bad spot because nobody wants to continue living through that.
God, no.
I remember the one thing I always think about when you were living in that house was your closet, which these energies, they love to mess in closets. I just don't get it. But there's something about a closet that really gets them going. And they love to move things, and they love to mess with things in there. And that I've noticed that, for decades. So I'm like, that seems so crazy to me. But and the other thing is, if you're in the proximity of any kind of a cemetery, and there's also a ley line in that area, that gets really crazy too. Because somehow they just use the spirits just use that frequency and come for a visit.
It's like a spirit runway. Come on in.
I know, it really is. So pretty odd.
I was going to ask you something. I'm not going to name the name of this place because I don't want to hurt their business, but remember when I told you that I went into like a dollar store to pick up something quick on the way to the airport, and I took about 6 steps into the store and I walked into what felt like a thick wall of gel, and my leg was like stuck up in it, and the clerk was looking at me and I was just mortified and shocked. I couldn't get out of it. I didn't know what was going on, and people were looking at me, and I'm just like so is that about that? Because I know you told me there's something there and I can feel it every time I drive by there. Is that a ley line and it's just a really negative one?
Yeah, it does feel like that. And I'll tell you something else interesting about ley lines, because I've read so much about this, and just fascinating to me. For some reason, if you are in proximity of a very powerful kind of negatively charged ley line, there's always, like, I don't know why, but certain bees and wasps are attracted to those. Certain spiders, sometimes people, I had a couple of situations where people literally could not, I mean, they did everything, could not get the spiders to stop coming into their living area with the house. I mean, and they did everything. They had the pesticide thing. They had
That's putting bad
Right.
visions in my head of a Harry Potter movie where spiders are just everywhere. Like, ugh.
well, I mean,
Remember that?
look at your experience with the bat
With the flies, those
and the flies.
flies.
I'd forgotten about those.
God, the flies that would, huge gray flies with red eyes that would just appear in my house, even if I hadn't opened a door or window, and they would appear, and there might be 20 of them on the mirror in my bathroom in the morning, right next to the closet you were talking about. And I would go through this killing frenzy of killing all these flies. And then I'd go to bed and there'd one be like, come out of my lamp and dive bomb my head. Like it was a nightly thing for a long time. And it was freaking me out. Like it felt, it did not feel good. It felt dark. It was an infestation
Well,
with no
yeah,
logical
is.
explanation.
It definitely is. And the sad thing is most people think they're going crazy. You know, most people, they think they're having either a physical event, like the walking into the store and hitting that wall. They think they're having some kind of physical medical event, but then it never happens again. Or they have whatever's going on with whatever's becomes an infestation. And they really think they're losing their mind.
And Roz, that bat situation, I was just thinking about it. That skylight was right over top of the ley line.
Right over the line.
And so I looked up one morning, I heard my angel said, look up. I'm holding my coffee. I look up and there's a bat in the corner of the skylight looking down at me. And it was there for days, just looking down.
Just laying there in the corner.
Creepy. I have a picture of
On the
that.
outside,
So
just like-
weird.
That, yeah. You better do a book about that.
I will eventually. I don't think I better lay that on people too soon, but eventually.
Well, the good
Let them
thing
see
was
me
you
with
did-
my angelic work first.
You did have angelic protection there because they were still telling you, don't worry.
That house was something else. And the funniest thing about it is like just looking at it was such a cute little house, innocent looking cottage house. And I want to say, just for anybody that finds themselves in a situation, you can be really sensitive to energy, and for different reasons, a house with a ley line can call to you. And I really felt pulled to live in that house. And I remember the tenant who was before me was there, and she said, how do you feel here? And I said, it feels really good to me. Like I tuned into that, like I opened myself up and tuned into it, and it felt really good to me. They really want, whatever the dark things there were, just really wanted me to live there, I'm sure. So
That's not
you
the
can
first
find,
time
I don't
I've
care,
heard.
how sensitive you are, you can find yourself in a situation that catches you by surprise.
Well,
Roz?
listen, didn't you?
Yeah, Roz has helped me with that a couple
Yeah.
of times.
I started
and-
to say, I think you had a house along in there too that was kind of crazy.
Oh yeah. And with one of them in particular, I lived there. It was a big, tall, high-rise apartment building. It was the very end of the Trail of Tears. That's
Oh,
ouch. And then there were many other things. Like there was like some toxic, psychopathic, radiating, terrible dumpster or something that happened right on the river there at the same place. And there's where all the tribe nations would come. There's a tree there still. There's a space. I used to go pray at this tree called the council oak right next to my high rise. And Roz, you had to help me several times in several places where I've lived.
I remember that now.
Several times. And so does that mean, I have a question, because this is not, I certainly don't know everything about this, but it kind of correlates with the with the, like our grid inside of our bodies too. And it can be the light or the dark, like where these grids come together. Is that true? Like it sort of activates like a little bit of a gateway, like Ivory and I both have had a couple of moments where it was like, what is going on with this lower, darker energy? Or it could be the higher energy calling you too. Is that true? Or am I off track on that?
I've kind of become a little convinced that this has got a little bit of past life stuff in it too, depending on your previous existences, your lives, and things that went on then, and things that you have almost like, I don't know, it's like an attraction, like that somehow you get drawn into feeling really good about that place. And then you go into it, and that's when all this other stuff starts.
The hammer of Thor, whammo.
That's actually pretty common.
I felt like an idiot. I felt so stupid. Like, here I am, a psychic medium, and I didn't know I was moving into the house with all this issues. But if something wants to hide from you, it can hide. But I don't want to go too off track here. But what's some of the odd things you've come across, Roz, when you're dealing with ley lines? Like, is there anything we haven't discussed about that?
One thing I think you have to realize is that our bodies, just like we were just saying, our bodies have only the history from the time that we are born until the time we leave here. But our soul has its Akashic record. So there's a tremendous amount of history in those. So you can be caught up kind of in events playing out. And, people always talk about karma and all that stuff. Well, I think when you have something that in a previous existence was pretty traumatic, or pretty just a lot of drama, going through a lot of different things, you have to realize and sometimes think to yourself, like, this isn't me. And that's a big part of it, I think. I did not, for a long time when I was young, I didn't encounter people who were having these traumatic events going on in their life. But when I got into my 20s, where I lived at that time, especially in my late 20s and starting into my 30s, I was living someplace that has a tremendous amount of this kind of activity, paranormal activity. And it's interesting because people realize in that area that something is going on. And I was, working a very regular job, but I helped a couple of people who were having some serious paranormal, scary stuff going on their property. So the word kind of got out, and I was actually managing a store, and these people would come in and go, I heard that so-and-so, you went to their house and you helped them. And it just started on its own after that. So, I've always done readings, but I don't really broadcast a lot this type of work because it's a little bit of a different ballgame. But I had a number of people that had property, and then two different people I'm thinking of when this first started getting intense, where they had issues with the tenant. Like one house, they could not keep tenants in there. And they couldn't figure out why. It was a very cute little house, and it was in a beautiful location. And so they asked me if I would go there. I said, sure. And I took a friend of mine with me because it was a little remote. And, I just had this vibe like, I don't think I want to go there by myself. So when I went to the property and went in, started to come up the stairs on the back, they had a mud porch. And when I started to walk up, right when I got to the door, my friend was behind me. And I opened the door into the kitchen area coming on in from the mud porch. And I was instructed, get out. You're not welcome here. And I was like, well, too bad. But I did step back because there was a force there. And I felt I was going to get clobbered if I kept going forward. And when I stepped back, of course, she was right behind me and we went boom. And that was probably the first house that I ever really did any serious dark energy mitigation. And that house was on the Ley Line. Although at the time, I didn't know anything. I could just feel it. And I thought, this has got some grid problems. Because I always just called it the grid.
Was that enough for them to be able to keep it rented after that? I'm just curious, like what kind of difference it can make.
That was what I would describe as a demonic situation. And it was a long-standing situation with that particular house. So I was not interested in really doing the level of work that would be required. And it was dangerous work. And, I was in my 20s and, and living a different life. So I just didn't feel that I could take that on. And when I told them that I didn't, that they needed to bring in someone to, like a priest or someone to bless the house, to clear, to do, because of all the things that had happened there. Because it was interesting, the house kind of had its own, and the land had its own Akashic record. And I could see that, and I was thinking, And as it turned out, they bulldozed it.
I was ready to do that with that house in Sedona, except I didn't own it. So that would have been wrong on every level.
Gotta get some water. Sorry. I think the main reason they bulldozed it was because they just could not keep it rented.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a repetition of events that went on there. And that was scary.
There's been movies made of that. I mean, these kind of things you see in movies, they usually do have some sort of basis of truth, even if Hollywood magnifies it and glamorizes it. There's still some nuggets of truth in there of how these things work.
Well, that's basically what happened when I agreed to do the story of that event that occurred. And I agreed to go on television and talk about it. This is a perfectly down-to-earth family, moved into a house. She had weird little events like you, like it felt very attractive to her. She felt drawn to it. She loved it. The minute she moved in, they had a crazy event with bees that tried to kind of take over the whole house. And then they started having these paranormal events. So I think people do not realize how the physical energy of the earth and of, the magnetic energy that the earth connects with the other planets. And it really gets complex. And they don't realize, they're not thinking about all of those things when they start having events, start happening paranormal things. And the one thing about that, I think, is that, the ley lines, because of the power of their energy and the energy of the earth and the people involved, it kind of gets into building an energy pattern in those situations. And sometimes you just have to move.
Does living on a ley line change how people feel emotionally?
I believe it does. I believe it affects them emotionally. It can affect them spiritually, because those are two things that are very much a part of our, you know, personal feelings and how we react to things. I think a lot of, you know, a lot of what happens in these situations is people kind of get sucked in, and they don't ever realize, they either think they're going crazy or somebody else in their family is going crazy, because it doesn't just affect one person a lot of times. So it's pretty interesting. I think, you know, sometimes, I mean, I've had situations where I just said to people, I think you're going to have to move. I mean, I said it to you.
I was going to say, you did say it to me, and I just started praying to God and asking my angels, get me out of this house as soon as possible. And it wasn't very long after that, I was out of that house. So it was pretty bad.
The one thing I would say to be aware of is that for a lot of people, there's some kind of magnetic situation that occurs where whatever's going on in that house wants to attach and come with you. And so you need to make sure that's not tolerated. That's not allowed.
You don't want that excess baggage, right?
Yeah, in your situation, and in yours too, Melissa. I mean, these were aspects of the land that were so strong. And it's so interesting because when Melissa first told me about some of the things that were going on there, I heard a lot when I was a child about the Trail of Tears and the intensity and the power of that land and all the land between where they.
I feel it now just talking about that, the emotions that had to have been felt by so many on that trail. Well, I can't imagine living at the end of that trail or anywhere near that trail. Ugh.
My grandmother was part Cherokee, so some of this was family history of people who had been forced to walk the trail and to go all the way there. And my mother told me some of those stories when I was little. And, you know, my mother, she had her gifts too. And she always, you know, said that, you know, that was just such a horrible event, that the energy of that, where they went,
I think it's rather
still
like
be felt.
people. I heard some story on NPR yesterday about going to the Holocaust places where the Holocaust happened, the concentration camps, and that people who wanted to understand more about what happened would go on a tour there and what it felt like. And just hearing that, like I just got like a swamp of emotions. So I'm sure like that, it's similar to that, where there's so many people who were in so much despair and so much trauma that it just imbues into the land itself. So I guess it's a lesson to all of us to be careful about where we move to.
Be aware.
You've been watching the Sedona Soul Sisters show, and if you'd like more information about us or our services, please visit our website, sedonasoulsisters.com. Tune in next week. Our topic is the shadow side of aliens. That's going to be an interesting one. In the meantime, we hope you have an enlightening week.